All right, all right. We are in the webinar. Thank you all that have showed up. I see 30 people and counting. I'm excited to be back this year with some incredible guests. Have to shout out Tour for Diversity in Medicine, fantastic organization. If you didn't know about them before you saw this webinar, they're definitely worth a follow for as long as I can remember. I think they had a recent anniversary, and Love can correct me. He's on the chat in the background, but over 10 years of supporting diversity in medicine. Back in the day, there was a bus that they would travel on, a lot of volunteers. They would get on a bus, 12 years. They would get on a bus and go to different colleges and medical schools and really be boots on the ground, providing representation for students that were aspiring to get into healthcare related careers, especially medicine. I think the pandemic slowed that down a little bit, but they just found other avenues. They built out this web platform, and we are back with another webinar. This week is kind of like the Olympics for Tour for Diversity, because throughout the week, there's panels for multiple specialties and other professional related topics. And you can check out their Instagram and follow their social media to see what else is going on, because it's going to be helpful to you as you launch your career. So thanks to them, thanks to Dr. Levanani, who was helping coordinate this, and Dr. Cam Matthews, who is elsewhere, but also very involved. We have a fantastic panel of extremely, extremely well-qualified anesthesiologists. Unfortunately, my buddy, Dr. Stephen Estime, he was unable to make it. He is one of the assistant program directors at University of Chicago, but he is on call. He's working and saving lives as we speak. We are joined by two other fantastic panelists. Dr. Leziga Obiyo. She is an obstetric anesthesiologist. She practices in Chicago. She is a graduate of Loyola, where she did medical school and anesthesia residency. She went to Stanford to specialize, or subspecialize rather, in obstetric anesthesiology. And she now practices in that subspecialty. We know our women need a lot of special tender love and care, and she can speak to so much with regards to women's care and anesthesia. Dr. Obiyo, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, and welcome all to hearing us have this wonderful discussion about the road to residency, specifically about anesthesiology.
Yeah, perfect. And now you're like, man, how long can this intro be? He's already been talking for 3 minutes, but we have yet another guest, Dr. Alicia Peterson. She is phenomenal. You'll see there's a lot of paths that were crossed. She attended Loyola for undergrad. She obtained her medical degree from Rush. She was actually an education and a teacher before this, as I was looking at her LinkedIn. After finishing her training in anesthesiology at University of Washington, St. Louis, she completed a pediatric fellowship at St. Louis Children's, and then a pain fellowship at Harvard. And she's practiced in several states, from Texas to DC, and she does even more than medicine. Fun fact, she was a guest on my podcast, the Black Doctors Podcast, and I was also a guest on her podcast, See Both Sisters, which is a fantastic show, especially empowering for women and underrepresented in medicine individuals, and focuses on anesthesiology. Fantastic podcast. Definitely check it out. Dr. Peterson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And just a real quickly, even though Dr. Stephen Estime isn't present, he did do an episode on the podcast about these very topics. So if you're like, hey, I want to hear his advice, I'll just drop the name of the podcast in the chat, and you can just look him up and hear what he has to say as well.
Perfect. The topic for today is the anesthesia match. As we know, anesthesiology, one, I think we can all vouch, it's a fantastic field. It's gained a lot of popularity recently. And, there are tips and tricks of the trade and strategies for how to obtain a successful match. I'll get this out of the way up front. There's no conflict of interest here. We do not speak on behalf of our respective specialties. This is merely a conversation providing advice and mentorship to you all who are here joining us. We will definitely take questions. I believe you can put questions in the chat. Love, correct me if I think that's the best place to put questions. And we'll have a couple to kind of kick things off. So the question everybody always asks when you have an anesthesiologist in front of you is, what pulled you into the field? Dr. Obiyo, what brought you to anesthesiology?
Oh, right. Thank you so much. That's always a question they always ask you on your interview. So feel free to take pieces from our responses if it inspires you or it resonates with who you are in your journey. I think for me, three things brought me into anesthesiology. I'm fortunate enough to have family members, specifically my father, who was already in medicine. So I was exposed to medicine very early, even from like high school and things of that nature. So I knew in my mind that when I thought of a doctor, I always thought of somebody in the operating room, specifically because my father's a surgeon. That was my first experience. And so through medical school, I enjoyed my operating room experience, my rotations. And so I knew that was a place that I wanted to go. Specifically, I found that in anesthesiology, I never thought about it before going to medical school. But when I serendipitously, one of my mentors that was assigned to me in medical school is an anesthesiologist. And I was really impressed with the dynamism and the diversity in the different places that she practiced. And I realized as I was going through my list of deciding what I wanted to do, is like I really enjoyed having diversity in practice settings, diversity in my workday, and also that interaction between different specialties was really, really important to me. So I knew I didn't want to be in a siloed kind of a practice. So anesthesiology met two of those things. I was going to be in the operating room. I was going to be able to have some interactions with different specialty services. And then lastly, for myself, I found that I really could bring my entire self to work as an anesthesiologist. So you learn all these different things in medical school. You learn about anatomy, you learn about physiology, you learn about pathology, you learn about pharmacology. We intertouch all those different types of courses throughout the entire day of our practice as an anesthesiologist. And then even your classes about how to be a doctor classes, we really hone in on those skills when we're talking to patients the first day when they're showing up for surgery. And we literally get anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes to be able to make that connection with the patient. And I enjoyed the challenge of being able to make that connection with the patient, engender their trust from them as well as their family members. So those were the three things that really drew me into anesthesiology, aside from just the clinical component of it all.
Fantastic. And Dr. Peterson, before you answer, the question and answer box is the best way to ask us questions. But extend the same question to you. What pulled you to the field of anesthesiology?
Absolutely. So, growing up, families they don't really talk when other family members might be ill. And my mom just randomly mentioned to me when I was in high school, "Hey, why don't you look into anesthesia? Your dad had one of those, and I was really impressed with how he took care of your father." And at the time, it didn't even click with me that he was getting a procedure. It just stuck with me. Okay, anesthesia, I'll look into that. When I went into medical school, I found during that third year, there wasn't any specialty that I like really loved. Like, oh, I gotta just do the heart, or I've gotta just take care of lungs. And so I ended up having to sign up for a rotation in anesthesia and found that that was a nice merger between physiologies of all the different organ systems. I liked how hands-on it was. And I enjoyed taking care of patients in their most vulnerable state. Being able to form that connection quickly, I really enjoyed that. So also, anesthesiology has such diversity within the field as well, as far as OB, peds, pain. I ended up also pursuing and doing a lot of pain because I wanted an interaction that lasted longer than the perioperative period. But I was really delighted to see that there was so much you can do within the field of anesthesia. We're all over the hospital. So
Fantastic, fantastic answers. And one of the first questions in the chat, let's see, it specifically asked about the application itself. There's been a lot of changes to residency application since I think we all applied. We were all doing in-person interviews. which if we get started talking about that, we could probably take the rest of the hour reliving the memories. But Ms. Moore asks, thank you all for joining. Can you speak more about the central app this year? It is due before ERAS, and I wanted to know if you all know the benefit of this. Dr. Obiyo, do you know about the central application?
I have no, I'm honestly, I'm sorry, I can't speak to this application. I think, let me just think on it.
I read some stuff in preparation because it's been so long. I watched an hour-long YouTube video about the application process. So I know somewhat what I'm talking about. But basically, it looks like they now have a central process where you're going to upload a lot of your documents, and then it's going to feed into the rest of the match portal. So I think it's just another step in the process. I think over the years, they've worked to make it more streamlined, and even some changes that have affected how much you may end up paying, which I think we're going to get into a little later. And I think Dr. Peterson is going to answer this question live as well.
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh, no, she's not.
You were answering it, and I just clicked on it. That's all. I wasn't trying to interrupt your answer.
Okay, no worries. So yeah, I think it's just another portion of the ERAS application process. It's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I think right. I'm sorry to cut you off. I think you're right. That's true. It is a central application. It's the application that goes to all the programs that you apply to. And then some programs will have supplemental questions, kind of like what they did in medical school. And so that's where some programs have just use a central application with all of your information, like all your med school scores, your test scores, all your letters of recommendation, all those kind of things that are kind of piled together with that. And then there are some programs that have like a supplemental application or have additional questions that they may ask you to answer based on what programs you apply to. I cannot speak to the prices. I know the prices have changed since I finished medical school, but I believe that's what the central application is about. Feel free to let us know in the Q&A if we answer that question appropriately for you.
Perfect. Thank you. Dr. Peterson, there's another question here from Jericho Weeks Thomas. Are there any anesthesia residency programs for international medical graduates?
I'm so glad you asked this question because there is an episode on the CVO Sisters podcast relating to this very topic. I interviewed Dr. Chuma Azoba, who is a medical graduate from St. George's. And what he recommends is looking at the different programs that have accepted international medical graduates. And also he found that just in general as a trend, there tends to be like the community parts, like the community programs that happen to have an anesthesiology residency tend to accept more IMGs. But I don't want you to think in any way that you must be limited to only programs that you know have accepted IMGs in the past, because this application process is really about networking and relationships. And so we have a whole episode dedicated to how to do that, reaching out to the residents of the programs you want to go to on Twitter or LinkedIn, going to conferences, going to these open houses, being very vocal about your desire to pursue anesthesia, because a lot of folks who are international medical graduates, DOs, they don't want to even declare it because the program just doesn't feel like it's supportive of you pursuing a specialty. So I think that might be the first hurdle, is just letting everyone know that you're interested so that they can rally and support you. But check out those episodes.
Dr. Obiyo, anything to add?
Sure. Yes, there are residency programs that accept international medical graduates. Like Dr. Peterson said, there are programs that have historically accepted. So if there are people from your actual program that have been accepted to anesthesia residencies that you are aware of, definitely reach out to those individuals and see if they can help create that pipeline for you. If they haven't been accepted by your program recently, but people from your program have been accepted to that program in the past, you can also reach out to that program director and just talk with them and say, hey, these are my stats. I'm interested in doing anesthesia residency at your program. And then the third thing I would say to do is always try and take advantage of an away rotation if you can. I currently have a handful of medical students that I mentor, and I tell them that those away rotations is basically like a month-long interview. So even if your stats aren't necessarily the most stellar stats in the world and you look like a shoe-in for anesthesiology, if you're able to secure an away rotation at any of these programs, whether it be an academic institution or a community program, you going there, being on your best behavior, being the first one in, the last one out, knowing your patients throw in and out, understanding the anesthetic plans for your patients, will give them an opportunity to see who you are and how your possible work ethic, and that will shine above whatever your paperwork looks like as well too.
Fantastic. And Dr. Peterson added the name Dr. Chuma Azoba from that episode to the chat, so you should be able to see that there and look it up. I will say for everybody in these situations where it's IMG or you say my application is not the strongest, you have to use your resources wisely. And a lot of times those resources are often at your home institution. They know your package inside and out. They know where people have matched from before. And I know it's great to go to different conferences and meet people like myself and Dr. Peterson, Dr. Obiyo, but those one-off meetings, especially if you're going to be applying in the next 1 to 2 to 3 months, this mentorship process takes a lot of time. And as much as I would happily write a letter or make a phone call, I won't be able to vouch for you as hard as somebody that you've been working with for a year, or maybe you've done a research paper with. So understand that when you're asking for help, understand what resources you have and who you've built these relationships with, which brings us to research, because this is a question that always comes up. Dr. Obiyo, I wonder, when you applied to anesthesia, how much research was involved in your application? And then how much do you think it's a factor now?
That's a great question. I think I had quite a bit of research. I went to a program that had a research honors program in which I was a part of for my first year of medical school. I was able to get published and all that kind of stuff and presented at many conferences. So I had a pretty robust research component to my application. I will say this, two things. One, it depends on where you are in medical school. If you're a fourth year medical student and you haven't done any research, yes, continue to actively pursue some type of research to get involved into, but you want it to be meaningful, A, B, something that you're passionate about, and C, something that you can speak to and is more than just like cleaning off like something that's not necessarily meaningful to the actual research project. So if you're a fourth year medical student, I would say continue to pursue it. However, if you don't have it, you can still match into anesthesiology. If you are third year, if you are second year, if you are first year, I would really pursue it a little bit more aggressively and try and get into something that's a bit more longitudinal, because it shows for commitment, it shows diligence, it shows discipline, it shows more than just the actual research project. Who cares what the research project is? You could have been doing something about cells and whatnot, but you follow that project from the beginning all the way to the end, and you're able to speak about the results and what you did and all those kinds of things. It's a much better experience than somebody who just did a summer research program and that was like kind of it, and it was a one and done touch thing, and that's all you did there. So think about where you are. If you're at the end of the medical school career, I would just, if you can get into it, you can. If you can't, bolster up your application other ways. If you're have a few years ahead of you before you actually apply, see if you can find something meaningful that you can get into, that can be a relationship that you can, a research project, A, that you're passionate about, because if you don't like it, you're not going to do well with it. And then something that you can do that can show longevity, can show discipline, can show commitment, can show diligence, can show resilience, and can show your ability to have an appreciation for science. Even if you yourself don't want to practice research in your career, you should be able to have an appreciation for this basic science foundation that builds all of our clinical specialties.
Mhm.
And Dr. Peterson.
Yeah, so when I applied, I did not have any first author publications under my belt at all. I had done a lot of presenting at conferences. So I did an abstract. I did participate in, when I was in medical school, like a summer research program with the Mayo Clinic had one, and I was able to be in the lab of Michael Joyner, who's an anesthesiologist. And so I think that the way research can help you, it could both help and hurt. Here's how it can hurt. If you have a research project on your CV and interview time comes and they ask you about your project and you mumble something or you don't know or you don't remember, that's a problem. So if it's on your CV, it's fair game for an interview question. That's how it hurts. How it helps is that, yes, it does demonstrate intellectual curiosity, and a lot of the things that Dr. Obiyo was mentioning, I think that it's a great tool for establishing that long-term mentorship that Dr. Bradley was mentioning, right? Because it's like, how can we connect with these faculty members long-term? That's how they get to know you. That's how they're able to advocate for you. Ideally, if it can be an anesthesiology faculty, that would be great because you're knocking two birds. If it's not, that's fine too. Again, as long as it is something that you are interested in, but don't beat yourself up if you don't have a first author publication. I know people are really going crazy with that. And it raises eyebrows too for some people. If they're like, you are a medical student, how are you able to, brandish off all these publications? And so I do know personally, being on the other side reviewing applications, we did find that somebody had a father who was putting their child on, and it's very different for us because not many of us have somebody in medicine who's doing that, but it is out there. So the short of it is, yes, get an abstract, present at conferences, present the work, establish the mentorship piece, ideally over the course of months, years. And that's how you get it. It's relationships. It's all about forming those relationships and allowing us to support you in your quest to become an anesthesiologist.
It's fantastic. And along those lines, there's again, I'm a big proponent of not reinventing the wheel. There's the FAER, FAER program. Don't ask me what it stands for, but it's research for anesthesia. The RADAR program, which is geared towards health equity. It's out of University of Michigan, Dr. Wixon, and University of Washington, St. Louis. And the American Society of Anesthesiologists has a medical student component. So getting involved with any of those three organizations is a pathway to get involved in research. It's a little late, probably, if you're in your fourth year and about to apply. But if you're on the call and you're a second year or third year medical student, definitely look into those programs. We have a question about away rotations. Dr. Peterson, do you have any tips on how to stand out during away rotations?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep plugging the podcast, but I do have a dedicated episode to this because to perform well in an away rotation, it does help tremendously if you have done your research on the program and the faculty member you're going to be working with. You do want to be there when the resident is going to be there, which is early, because during those quiet times, you can draw up drugs. Some places might, you could spike a bag. You may be able to place IVs and pre-op. Do not come to your away rotation as the patient is rolling through the door. And I am seeing that more and more, because once the patient rolls through the door, there's no time for questions. And I see some medical students falter because they're like, ooh, I'm in the room, I'm with you guys, let me start asking questions. And it's like, no, we have to 100% focus on the patient. So it's having also some degree of situational awareness. You ask your questions at the beginning of the day before the patient has arrived, when during the induction, and then when you come in that early, you establish what your role is going to be throughout the day. So it could be, okay, well, you'll focus on IVs for this first case, or, we'll walk through an intubation. So you set yourself up very nicely by coming in early, and you're allowing yourself to become more hands-on and establish a relationship. Now, once you're in the room, and it's, induction time, you do whatever it was that you all agreed upon, whether you do the IV, airway, what have you. But the induction time is not the time to ask questions, neither is the wake up time. And so there's this maintenance period where if you have questions and you weren't able to answer them earlier that day, fire them off. But I think it's key to maintain energy, maintain enthusiasm. No one is expecting you to know anesthesia. So if you are presented with a question and you don't know, just say you don't know. But showing up and having a positive attitude really is what speaks the most volumes. And then at the end of the day, you may get some folks who are like, okay, well, you can go home early, whatever. I think it says a lot to be like, no, I want to finish the day. That is if you don't have a lecture or something that you have to attend to. And I think it's also very helpful to take on a call, just like one call to see what that's like. Because OR anesthesia during the day is very different than at night. And if your only exposure is like, let's say peds anesthesia, you should be at the adult hospital. That's where the majority of your training is going to be. And if you are interested or curious about like OB or pain, that's something that you should request in your rotation block. So yeah, I think just being vocal about what it is that you like and also having that energy and enthusiasm, because I think a lot of medical students, they beat themselves up if they don't know the answer to a question. And it's like, are you kidding me? They're just trying to assess like where you are, and it gives them an opportunity to teach, because if you know everything, then how can you be taught, right? And so this really is not meant to be a gotcha. It's really intended just to provide an opportunity to teach you. So I think that would be the majority of it. Yeah. Come early. That's a big one.
Yeah. Dr. Obiyo.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Peterson said was pretty much a lot of the things that I say. I do believe, like, I agree with her coming early. What does that look like? That looks like anywhere between 6:15 and 6:45. Most residents are getting to the hospital between 6 and 6:30 just to get their room set up. So you're going to an away rotation. Let's say this is not an institution that you are familiar with. Trying to figure out who your resident is, communicating with your resident the night before, preferably before 8 p.m. We are early birds for our job, so many of us do not appreciate getting that call or that page at 8:30, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. That's not the time to reach out to your resident the night before. Another thing you can do is also read about your cases once you figure out what your assignment is going to be. Get access to the electronic medical record if that is the system that they have at that institution, and read about your patients, knowing what their past, you're a medical student, so you should be able to understand what their past medical history is, what is the indication for surgery. There are a lot of textbooks that are out there that even talk about the surgical procedure, so you have some appreciation for what could be the things that an anesthesiologist would be concerned about given this patient's history, as well as the surgery they're presenting for. So those are types of information that, yes, you may not understand the nuts and bolts about the anesthesia, but the patient's medical history, the surgical history are things that you've had your surgical rotations, you've had your medical rotations. Those are things you should be able to speak to with confidence and with preparation. And then also when you're on your rotation, like Dr. Peterson said, have an enthusiasm and being engaged. There are times in anesthesia where it's just quote unquote downtime. Those are times to be actively engaged. You may see your residents beginning to prepare for the next case. That might be a time you can step up with your resident and say, hey, how can I help you prepare for the next case? That could be the time to review what you saw and what you didn't understand and say, hey, why did we do it this way? I read about it being happening that way. That's a way for you to show engagement, and also for you to also understand and learn some of the things that are happening behind the scenes that are not necessarily externally explicitly communicated to you while the case is ongoing. Always introduce yourself to the nurses. The same thing what you do in your rotations from medical school. Introduce yourself to the nurses, introduce yourself to the attending, introduce yourself to the surgeon, if so. But definitely you should be somebody that's willing to, the things that you are comfortable doing that's underneath your purview of understanding and what you've done already in medical school, continue to do those things at your OA rotations. These are the types of things that are not necessarily written about in your personal statement or in your dean's letter or your letters of recommendation. These are the things that make us decide, or as someone who's making decisions about applicants, is this someone that I can see being a part of our team for the next 3 to 4 years? These are the traits that make somebody that may have been a great applicant all of a sudden not turn into a great applicant because the interpersonal skill set is just not there. That gel, that collegiality, how you interact with other individuals, that's what you're being evaluated on, in addition to your medical knowledge and all these other things. So keep that in mind as well, too, when you're going on your away rotations.
It's fantastic. And to piggyback off of what was just said, the students that stick out in my mind, because there's the students that, like Dr. Peterson said, I don't know, back in our day, but I don't want to sound like a boomer, but back in our day, we had to show up early. People are a lot nicer now. Depending on how it's good that medicine is kind of more hospitable and kind and caring. But what you'll see is people aren't going to get onto you necessarily for showing up at 7 o'clock. They're going to take you into the room and you're going to kind of stand there and you're going to watch anesthesia go on. And they may not say, hey, where were you? Because we're too busy. We're worrying about teaching residents, providing safe patient care. And little do you know, you missed out on what could have been a good learning experience or what could have solidified your relationship. The students that stick out to me are the ones that I go in the room and I see them already in there with the resident, helping prepare stuff and set up medications. They're the students that say, they wait till after induction and then say, oh, I noticed you gave less propofol than you normally gave. Why did you adjust the dose? Or why did you place an intratracheal tube instead of a laryngeal mask airway? Those questions show, like Dr. Peterson and Dr. Obiyo mentioned, that grasp of the concept. You've read the book, you know about the patient. The students that I've worked with that introduce themselves to the patient, introduce themselves to me, the attending, very politely. That, in my mind, goes from saying, okay, I'm going to teach the student because this is an academic center, to you've got a career in anesthesia. And now you have that mentor, that advocate. To Dr. Peterson's point that, it's time to go home, you want to cut out early, it's 2 o'clock. When you could say, I'm gonna give you this pro tip. No, I want to stick around, or instead it's better to say, well, I want to see how this patient wakes up, or I want to see how you induce this difficult airway. Because then again, it ties that piece that I am here to learn anesthesia because this is what I want to do in my life. So fantastic. This is great.
And real quickly before we move on to the next question, one, I also want to say, because anesthesiology is so collegial in that you are working with multiple disciplines, introduce yourself to the nurses, be kind to every staff, the circulators, the techs, everyone, because I think some people start to fall apart where they're like, okay, well, I know I want to kiss up to the attendings and the physicians, and then they ignore the fact that it's like, no, this is a team approach across disciplines. So introduce yourself to the tech, introduce yourself to the circulating nurses, and that's how you also stand out as well. And then, secondly, what was that I was going to say? Maybe it'll come to me. But yeah, I think if it comes to me, I'll type it in the chat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah, so much.
We have a question about letters. Where did it go? Letters of recommendation. Thank you all for this opportunity. This is from Ebrima Kente. Does having only one anesthesiology letter of recommendation affect a chance of matching? And I think we'll broaden this. Dr. Obiyo, what's your thoughts on letters of recommendation, how to obtain one, who do you ask, how many do you think are appropriate?
Sure. To answer your question, Ebrima Kente, I think no, having one letter from an anesthesiologist does not affect your chance of matching. Similar to how you applied for medical school, you want to get people who are writing letters who know you. Yes, your dean may or may not know you. And the dean's letter kind of has like this templated format that most deans write for everybody. So that's important. But the letter of recommendation should be someone that knows you and can speak to your interests, your passions, and sometimes even aspects of your application that may room for interpretation by other individuals. So yes, an anesthesiologist is definitely at least have one for sure. If you had 3 letters of recommendation from an anesthesiologist, I mean, that's cool, but we've all, like Dr. Peterson, Dr. Bradley have both said, we work with other specialties as well too. So that doesn't really speak to your ability to be a team player in a multidisciplinary team. So having a really strong letter of recommendation from an anesthesiologist is probably best. That patient may or may not be at your institution if your institution doesn't have anesthesiology rotation. It might have been the person that you rotated with, an attending that you rotated with at your OA rotation, maybe the attending you worked with 4, 5, 6 times. You got a really good chance to build a good rapport and relationship with them. That could be somebody that could be a letter writer for you, that can speak to, you and anesthesia specifically. Outside of that, if you had a really good rotation, let's say you had a really great time on your peds rotation and you did a lot of great work and you have someone that can speak to that, that's another place that can just add some more color to more pixels to the picture of who you are as a person. So you want to be discriminating and discerning about who you write your letter, who writes a letter for you. They want to be able to speak about you as a person, speak about you as your passion for medicine, and speak about you as your passion for this field of interest that you're interested in, whether they are part of that specialty or not.
All right.
That's great.
And this actually links to what I wanted to contribute in the last question. Okay, so you mentioned about how many letters do you need? And I'm also going to, well, I'm going to express that when folks, many of these anesthesia rotations, they vary, right? Some people only have done a week, some people 2, some people are able to get a whole month. And I think what's incredibly important when you are on your rotation is to prove to yourself that this is a field you want to go into. So some people are still, like, I don't want to, step on any toes. I don't want to express that I like it too much, or I don't really know how to convey. If you don't know how to convey your interest in anesthesia, that to me says that you need another rotation, you need another deep dive, you need another experience. And so on the rotation, it's ideal to get an anesthesiology letter of rec from a senior faculty member, because a senior faculty member knows how to convey the qualities in you that we care about as anesthesiologists. So what are those qualities? Someone who can communicate very well, someone who's can work in teams, somebody who's a hard worker, reliable. And so obviously you don't need just an anesthesiology faculty to talk about those characteristics. It can be that pediatric attending. It can really come from anywhere, as long as they are expressing and vouching that this is a medical student who knows how to work with other people and is bright and hardworking and reliable. And so wherever that comes from, that's great. The senior faculty member, it would be ideal if you can to do a rotation where you're working with someone like that. Again, because one of the first things that someone sitting across the table, when they're looking at your applications, they're saying, okay, who's writing this? And so if it is someone senior, it carries more weight than someone who's more junior. But like I said, if you only are able to have that 1 week rotation and it just so happens to be with a junior faculty member, take it, okay? Like, don't, but if you have an option, that would be great.
And this goes for people at academic programs, but there was also a question specifically about I don't have a home program. And I commented on the chat, but to go further, if you did a surgery rotation somewhere, there's an OR, there's anesthesia. It may be a private group, it may be mostly staffed by nurse anesthetists, but there's anesthesiologists around somewhere, and you can go that extra step in going to find that private group and emailing them or seeing them in the OR. I want to do anesthesia. Can I come shadow you? Whether it's a formal rotation or not, if there's no program, then I recommend doing an away rotation. But you can become invested in those private anesthesiologists, and they will be able to take you under their wing and mentor you, shadow, or have you shadow, provide that letter of recommendation. I tell students that want to shadow me, I will send them my work schedule. I got to come to work every day. I had the last week, I was on nights in the ICU. I had a student, she was a pre-med, but she works during the day. She came at night, 7 o'clock. She stayed till 11 just to see what the ICU was like. And so, like Dr. Peterson was mentioning, when you find that attending, because what you'll probably find in a lot of programs, they're going to plug you in every day somewhere. Maybe not with that same attending. But at 2 o'clock, when you get dismissed for the day, maybe go see where that attending was that you were with yesterday or the day before. Oh, are they an OB? Oh, do you mind if I, watch you do a couple of epidurals, and you go find that attending, and then maybe the next day find them again. And you need to get 3 or 4 or 5 interactions with one person for them to be able to confidently write you a good letter of recommendation. That's something that, depending on how the rotations are set up, that we may miss in some programs, but something that you can correct for and make sure that you have that strong letter. Great. Oh man, I think we're getting through. There's a lot of questions. There was. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Obiyo. Do you have something to...
Oh, no, I was looking at the question from Mr. Dawson. I don't know if we want to go towards that one, or if there's any other ones you wanted to go before
No,
that.
go for it. Yeah, that's great.
All right. So your question, Dawson, says, thank you for your time. As Black anesthesiologist, can you discuss where promoting health equity fits into your daily career and or research interests? It's a great question. So as Dr. Bradley mentioned, I'm an obstetric anesthesiologist. I spend about 50% of my time doing obstetric anesthesia, which means I work on labor and delivery, taking care of women who are coming to have their babies. The rest of my time, I work everywhere else an anesthesiologist is deployed in the hospital. So for me, in my clinical work, one of the reasons why I chose to work at the University of Chicago is because where it's geographically located on the south side of Chicago, there's a large percentage of African-American patients, a large percentage of patients who are under the lower socioeconomic status, and patients who are vulnerable for a myriad of reasons, whether it be migrant or any other reason like that. So I get that health equity component in my work that I do as an anesthesiologist, specifically on obstetrics, where I'm taking care of women who typically have a lot of other health disparities and other comorbidities that cause their delivery and or their pregnancy to be complicated by a myriad of things. And so I'm also part of a group of anesthesiologists who are also interested in looking at health disparities, and that's a thing that I'm interested in as well too. And there's been research that's demonstrated there is disparity in Black women utilizing labor neuraxial and or neuraxial for cesarean delivery, and also pain management for that. So I'm very aggressive in making sure that when I take care of my Black patients, I'm communicating with them and dispelling their myths and talking to them about how, yes, you may not want an epidural, but this is how it can help you. And a lot of times seeing a woman who looks like them, talk to them, engenders trust with them and allows them to have better outcomes specifically with their delivery and their peripartum period. Also with the University of Chicago, I also have a large percentage of patients who are actually African-American on the adult side that come for surgical procedures. And so in my clinical care of the patients, I'm trying to provide equitable care with them and keeping in mind the fact that sometimes their concerns may not just be about the surgery, but other things that are going on, and there are things that are going on in their life that may impact their ability to get through the perioperative space in a safe way. As far as research goes, my research is just, I'm a little bit more collaborative in that regard. And then also I do a lot of speaking engagements. And so I do speak on this topic specifically at the national levels, whether it be for the organizations that I'm a part with. And lastly, depending on where you go, I understand that in anesthesiology, there are not many of us who look like us who are there. And sometimes, even with the few African-American residents that we may have, there may not be opportunities specifically looking to make sure that they get pushed forward as much as our other counterparts do. And so I've been blessed to be at an institution that's quite supportive. A few weeks ago, Dr. Bradley's my witness, I was able to bring 2 residents with me to go to the National Medical Association and be a part of the airway workshop and teach and do some hands-on teaching. And that's a huge component of professional development and giving those young women a chance to just put themselves out there in front of other anesthesiologists across the country and build their own professional network. So that's a passion of mine that I personally have, and I'm blessed to be at a place that is very supportive of that. And so hopefully that answers your question, Dawson, about how I bring health equity into my work and into my interests as well, too.
That's great. Dr. Peterson, I'd love to hear
Yeah.
from you.
Yes. So this is a great question. All the questions have been great, by the way. where addressing health disparities shows up for me, or really supporting health equity, is in the educational sector and then clinical. In the educational sector, when I was working for an organization, we partnered with Howard Medical School because they don't have a anesthesiology training program. And so those who were interested or curious about anesthesia, they participated in this. And I kept getting the same questions from them over and over and over again about applying to anesthesia and what anesthesiologist does, and ways to really break into what felt like a good old boys club. And so I'm like, you know what? I got tired of answering the same questions over and over again, and hence the reason that the podcast was born. So Siva Sisters podcast, it demystifies and diversifies the field of anesthesia, all within the duration of an anesthesia break, because people don't have time to sit around listening to a 50-minute grand round. And so by making these micro episodes, it was really, I was able to not only help the Howard medical students, but also students across the country who have these same questions, who don't have that that family member that's in anesthesia, or maybe the faculty who are anesthesiologists are so isolated from the medical students that it's like, it's very intimidating to have these conversations. So that's how I address health equity. One, we do know that research has expressed that when the physician looks like the patient, care is better, communication is better, trust is enhanced. And when trust is enhanced, that means that the recommendations that we make, patients actually follow. And so this was very critical for me in the pain world too. So moving on to the clinical arena, honestly, you don't know how much of an impact just you being there has. Patients breathe, exhale, a sigh of relief, like, thank God. And you just don't even know how much that means to people. So being there, being present, speaks volumes. And then being able to communicate and connect with your patients. One thing that I have done, well, I've done this many of times, is I do a lot of speaking as well, particularly working with pediatricians. So I work with the American Academy of Pediatrics to include more pain education in their curriculums, because we don't talk about how to treat or assess pain. And unfortunately, if we don't have this discussion, then people start to rely on their biases. And unfortunately, people still think that Black skin is thicker than whites, that Black nerve endings are less sensitive. And so Blacks and Browns don't need opioids, or they don't need, and it's a real problem. So a lot of education with other physicians too has been some of my work.
It's fantastic. I'm going to jump into the question. I was surprised it took so long to come up, signaling. I know Dr. Estime, our esteemed program director, he knows a lot about this, but since he told me he's on call, I watched that hour-long video so I could answer these questions. And I'll refer you also to Dr. Brian Carmody. He is a nephrologist in Virginia, but he dedicates for whatever reason, his passion is ERAS. Follow him on Twitter. He makes YouTube videos about this. Again, he made an hour-long YouTube video out of the goodness of his heart to break down how you should approach signaling and the match. He has a couple tips. He says, put yourself in the program's shoes. So in 2022 to 2023, there was an average of 62 applications per applicant. These programs are getting killed. They're getting hundreds of applications that they have to sift through and review. Imagine you're a program director and you have to look through hundreds of very competitive applications. ERAS has developed this signaling pathway where I believe it's this year 5 gold signals and 10 silver signals to denote which programs you truly have an interest in going to. Unfortunately, some of the mentees that I've had in previous years, I'm going to be frank, they wasted their signals. We say there's levels of residency programs. There's the elite programs and mid-tier and the low tier. I'm going to shake it up a little bit and say, what is your goal? Number one, is your goal to match and to become an anesthesiologist? Number two, there's tiers of programs, but there's also at the very bottom, your ACGME accredited. There's a couple programs that may be on the verge of losing accreditation. It may be hard to figure out who those programs are, but by and large, most residency programs are they're ACGME accredited. You will go there, you will learn how to be an anesthesiologist. There's the private programs like HCA and these other, I had somebody say they didn't want to go to HCA program, and I'm like, respectfully, as your mentor, you need to apply to an HCA program. I've had mentees that did not have good guide. It wasn't my mentorship. They went to somebody else first, and they wasted their signals on the Hopkins and the Harvards and these programs that, based upon their numbers in their application, they weren't a strong applicant for. So in his video, Dr. Kamodi, he breaks down how you should be strategic about using these signals. This is where mentorship comes in, and there's these groups in your institution that go to your anesthesia faculty mentor, whoever, they can look at your stats and look at recent applicants and tell you where you fit, and maybe look at these programs instead of this program. And maybe look at some smaller programs. There's also geographic signaling, maybe moving to the Midwest instead of a place where that's so concentrated with applicants, because it's getting more and more competitive. And I know, we want those Instagram posts of I matched my number one, and that's great, but we really need to stop kind of looking at, where did you match? You matched number one, and look at, I became an anesthesiologist. I matched successfully. I'm going to work hard for the next 3 or 4 years and learn how to be an anesthesiologist. So that's what I cannot stress enough. You need to have mentorship. You need to have a list of programs. These are the programs that I want to go to. Take that list to your mentor or to a senior classmate or somebody that just matched into anesthesia and say, is this realistic? Is this feasible? And start to kind of fix your list and figure out where you're going to send those signals to. Same with the geographic signals as well. So there's a lot of gamesmanship. And I think, unfortunately, for the first couple of years, as this was new, a lot of people were victim to not knowing. There's a lot of programs, I think it's becoming pretty standard that if you don't signal for the majority of programs, your application will not be reviewed. I am not affiliated with an academic program. I've talked to different people, different groups, looked at stuff on Twitter and Reddit. That's where I'm getting my information from. So I can't speak for any academic centers, but there's a lot of programs that will not interview you if you haven't signaled. And if you signaled the program that everybody signaled, well, that program just got 2,000 applications to review. And that's, those numbers are, I'm not great at math, but those aren't good odds.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to briefly say that the students that I have interviewed that are now matched in anesthesia, they talk about, for the gold signaling, reserving that for those relationships you have formed, okay? So the research mentor, the conference, if you go to these virtual open houses, you've made a connection, and you've made a connection over space and time. So it's not just that one thing, as Dr. Bradley was saying. So the gold signals for them, where you've actually touched down, they know your name, you've made a connection. And then the silver signals are reserved for those programs whom, again, you might have some kind of tie there. The program may be amazing in A, B, C, and D. It's a stretch, it's your dream program, but really focusing on those programs whom you do have a relationship. And the students that I interviewed, I put their names in the chat for you to review, because yeah, there is a lot of strategy to this.
Fantastic. As we wrap up, I'd love to have just some final thoughts from Dr. Obiyo and then Dr. Peterson on match, and just maybe some positive. I'm negative. I'm sorry. I'm a very pretty candid person. So maybe some positive thoughts and advice and encouragement for these aspiring young anesthesiologists.
Sure. This world of matching is beyond what I can even begin to comprehend. And now that I'm on the faculty side, I'm beginning to see a little bit behind the inner workings, and it's a lot. But here's what I'll tell you. I believe that anesthesiology is an amazing specialty. There are people who are pessimistic about medicine, and they have their reasons. I'm not going to try and argue against those reasons, but I can tell you for myself, I'm very happy. Um, there's a lot of opportunity. There are global opportunities. I saw a question about global opportunities for anesthesiology. There definitely is. This is definitely a specialty that has some element of travel associated with. So it does travel well across the seas if you are interested in doing global health. But that also again goes back to some of the things that Dr. Peterson and Dr. Bradley talked about, having the ability to build relationships with individuals and having a long-standing relationship. So you may meet somebody who's a surgeon who does things internationally, and you may not get to do anything right now, but when you become an anesthesiologist, you keep that pipeline of communication moving forward. You probably can come back and be supportive and bring your training with you over there to help support what they're doing. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of optimism if you find it. I think mentorship is key. Finding a mentor that's enthusiastic to mentor you. There are individuals who have a lot of mentees, and they may be the popular people, but they may not be the right mentor for you. Definitely utilizing your home institutions. You chose that medical school for a reason, so definitely try and ink out and squeeze out all of your money's worth while you're at your home institution to give you some guidance into where you want to go and what you want to do. And last thing I'll say is that medicine, from what I've experienced, is a meritocracy. That was once told to me when I was applying for medical school many moons ago. And I find that to be true. If you work really, really hard and you have the right people advocating for you, you can get where you want to go in life. But understand that for those of us in anesthesiology who look like ourselves, we understand that just like our grandmothers and grandfathers told us, we do have to work a little bit harder just to make sure that we don't fall through the cracks. When you do get to residency, find a mentor who's willing to mentor you through to make sure that not only do you match, but you also successfully complete your residency, you become board certified, and you complete the entire process. And so I do want to encourage you to do that.
All right. And a few things I want to say. So one is that do not let a fail step one, fail step two, any of that deter you if you really want to go into anesthesia. Because again, I've interviewed those who recently matched in anesthesia. It can happen. It is possible. So what? You're an IMG. So what? You're a DO. Yes, you can do it. I feel like people use these as ways to kind of, get out of doing the work to match. And it's like, no, you can do this. It's really about establishing relationship and you coming to the table like, I am valuable. I have energy. I have enthusiasm. I'm interested in this. This is what I want to do. This is what I want to pursue. People fail in that if it's somebody after talking to you within the OR, when you're on rotation or you're at conferences, and they can't get a sense of if you really want to do anesthesia because you just don't have any grounding in or experience or exposure, that's what messes you up. So have enough exposure to feel confident in your decision to pursue anesthesia. And then I know we didn't talk about like CV, personal statement, interview stuff, but what I will say is that your personal statement should not be a narrative CV. You should not be reiterating the same things. The personal statement is a great opportunity to discuss your unique connection to the field. What stood out to you when you were on rotation? Is there a family member or something that got you interested in the field? That's what you write in the personal statement. The CV, when people are flipping through that, because they're flipping through that probably 3 minutes before you walk in the room, they want to know what experiences have you had that is of value to an anesthesiologist. So, if you worked somewhere, again, it shows that you know how to work in teams, you know how to communicate. Those are the experiences that you put at the top. And then in the interview process, please do not say, I like physiology and pharmacology. Oh my gosh, every interviewer has heard that a million times, and you just get lost in the sauce because everybody's saying the same thing. So be prepared when they ask you, are you interested? Why are you interested? You express something that's very personal and very unique to you. And that is what they're going to remember. And if you want to do some, super specialized, like, hey, I'm, interested in OB and I want to focus on X, or I want to do pediatric pain or something like that, niching down, even though that might not even be what you do, but niching down, they say, hey, that student seems pretty passionate about that. And then what the interviewer starts to do is think about what faculty member I compare you to once we get you here, right? Like, no faculty member can do that for you if you're like physiology, pharmacology, and like, how can I help this kid, right? Because everybody's saying the same thing. So those are the things I would recommend. Be unique, stand out, which is so different than medical school. Because in medical school, you don't want to stand out. People who stand out have failed something or they look bad, but you want to stand out in the interviewing process, because that's the only way they will say, we want her or we want him, because we remember them. And that's huge when they have to interview so many people.
Oh my goodness. Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Thank you to all 44 folks that have come in to listen. Dr. Peterson, Dr. Obiyo, thank you for taking your time to share this information. Dr. Lovinani in the background, thank you for moderating. I was up to 49, all right. Dr. Cameron Matthews and the folks at Tour for Diversity. As we close, it's not a conflict of interest for me. I cannot speak highly enough about the University of Chicago medicine for anesthesia residency specifically, but across the board, the institution is awesome. Chicago is a great city. For diversity, like when I was a resident, we started the House Doc Diversity Committee, and there was times that I had 45 Black residents at my condo having game night. So the whole thing is a vibe. It's a great time. You're going to have great training from incredible attendings. So I can't speak highly enough, across the board. If your couple's matching, they've got every specialty for you. So on that note, thank you all so much for joining us. I put my information in the chat, but reach out to the folks at Tour for Diversity. If you need any additional information, they'll be able to plug you in with a mentor.
Thank you very much, all. Please follow the Tour for Diversity on all socials. Please follow the Estime and LMSA. This will end the panel. Thank you to our lovely panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.